morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio, the podcast where we talk with writers about their lives, their craft, their business, and their latest work. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and our podcast is sponsored by Bookmarks. Bookmarks is a literary nonprofit whose programs include the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas. Come visit Bookmarks at our community gathering space and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Inside the Writer's Studio is also proud to be an affiliate of Libro FM, the audiobook platform that supports your local independent bookstore. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast for more information on Libro FM and a special offer. My guest today is Annie Hartnett, whose novel Unlikely Animals has just been published. Annie, welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
This is just such a cool novel. There's so much to talk about here. But it was inspired, at least in part, by your discovery of what seems to me a fairly bizarre institution in New Hampshire. Tell us about Corbin Park, how you found out about it, a little about its history, and how it kind of led to beginning this novel.
Yeah, so I was writing a book that was about fifth graders and a substitute teacher. And it was something I had started when I was in the middle of writing my first book, Rabbit Cake. I had a professor who said, put that aside for a couple weeks so that you have something on the back burner, so that you don't just work on one thing for the rest of your life. And so I did that before I graduated. And then I did put that, on the back burner for several years while I worked on Rabbit Cake and finished Rabbit Cake. And then, Rabbit Cake was published, and I started working on that book about fifth graders, but it didn't have much magic to me. I was just kind of like, is the second book just, not as fun as writing the first? Is this all I get? So I was so that's like the place I'm in as I'm working. And then I'm up in New Hampshire visiting some friends who had just bought a house in Newport, New Hampshire, which is sort of near Sunapee. And the town is a small town, and I'm driving on this road, trees on either side of the road. There's like a small pond and a covered bridge. There's not even many houses in the area, in this particular area. And I look up, and there's like, it looks like it fell from the sky onto this mountain, or not mountain, hill. And it's this enormous yellow mansion, and it looks like the nicest hotel you've ever been to. And I just feel like, what is that? I want to go there. Is that a spa? And it has no trespassing signs on all the trees at the bottom of the driveway. Probably because for people like me who think it's a spa. And so I'm like, that's private property. And my friends didn't know what it was. So I Googled enormous yellow mansion, Newport, New Hampshire, and found out about this robber baron who had made all his millions, and was in several different industries, and then moved back at his retirement, moved back to the town he was born in, Newport, New Hampshire, knocked down the house he was born in, except for, and this is supposedly the room he was birthed in, the room he was born in, he kept intact. And then he built this mansion around it. Yeah. And so that was cool. So that's the first thing I find. And then I keep reading and find that he, as his retirement project with all his millions, he bought up 60 farms and fenced in 26,000 acres. And shipped in animals from all over the world. And so I'm really interested now, but I don't write historical fiction. I don't, as of now, think that I would ever try to write historical fiction because of sort of my sense of humor and the things that I wouldn't know how to edit out of myself. My sense of humor and my sort of interest in the internet. And I like my characters to have cell phones. And so I'm writing this book set in 2014, but I'm becoming obsessed with this history of this place. So I start going to the historical society in the town, just to kind of follow my obsession. And as I'm sitting in the attic of the Newport Historical Society, I find this guy, Ernest Harold Baines, who is a naturalist, who was a naturalist in the park from 1904 to 1925. and he was a real life Dr. Dolittle with animals living in his house. He had foxes, he had a bear, he had two timber wolves, he had coyotes, he had lots of little birds that were like in and out of the house. Songbirds were kind of his one of his main things he worked to protect. And I love animals and love writing about animals. And I'm just like, well, I have to write about this guy. This is a blessing, and I can't ignore this. So I didn't I started writing about him very quickly as a ghost, because I was just going to write that book that was set in 2014. And from the beginning, that it was a woman who came home to teach in her town, and she was coming home to take care of her dying father. So I already had like kind of the place to put the ghost, where that he has developed a friendship with one of the main characters, who's the man who's suffering from a brain disease. So there's a lot of that real history, and I'm able to, because all Ernest Harold Bain's work is in the public domain and his photos are in the public domain only recently, as of like 2 years ago. So I'm able to put it throughout the book.
Nice. Yeah.
In a way that adds to the texture of a book that is really set in 2014.
So this is the second book I've read recently that begins in a way which I love for a book to begin, which is with a map. Tell us a little bit about, so there's for readers who don't have the book yet, there's this absolutely charming map of your fictional town in New Hampshire, sort of this hand-drawn work of art. First of all, did you create it? Did somebody else create it? And how did you go about sort of visualizing the physicality of your fictional town?
Yeah, so I drew it. I am a super visual person.
Mhm.
I wanted to be an artist when I was a kid. That's what my sort of dream was. But I had a high school art teacher who sort of pulled me aside one day and said, and she also had me in art history class. And so she said, I know you, Annie, I know you love art, and I know you want to be an art major in college, but I have to tell you, you're a much better writer than you are an artist. And so I was like, woo. And since I have a very dark sense of humor, so I love when people tell me things that are sort of offensive and weird. I'm just like, put that away. Yeah. So it didn't really hurt my feelings so much, as I was like, high school teachers shouldn't tell kids that. But it did. It changed the direction of my life. And then, so fast forward, how I'm writing Unlikely Animals at MacDowell, and that's the place where all these different people, artists of different disciplines, are. And I was there at the same time as New York, this Amy Kurzweil, who's a New Yorker cartoonist. And I said to her one night, if you're my childhood dream, like you're the coolest person to me. So if I could watch you work sometime, if it wouldn't be a bother, that would be just like, I want to see just a little bit of, and if you don't want me to, I won't. But she was very generous with me, and so she brought all her tools. We would socialize after dinner. We would work during the day and then socialize after dinner. So she brought all her art stuff to dinner, and then after dinner, a bunch of us sat around, Amy and a couple of our other friends, and the Oscar-nominated actress Jane Alexander too. So it was just this cool group of people all learning to draw together from Amy Kurzweil, and so that kind of sparked something in me that was like, oh, this is something that I really like to do. It's fun. It scratches like another creative itch for me, and I can also finish something in a really short time, whether or not it's like really good. It's not the years that it spends working on a novel. So I kept drawing, and then my agent, I had not thought about putting a map in the book, but my agent, I guess my editor wanted one, and my agent told her that I could draw. And so I drew the map. And yeah, that is one of the coolest things to me about this book being out in the world, is just like it feels like a childhood dream of having my art in a published book, even though it's my own published book. But yeah, and also I like that I can put a little bit of my humor in the map.
It's, I mean, you could spend a while just sort of looking at that map, and sort of even before you read the book, and then of course you can flip back to it as you're reading. So one of the choices that every author has to make almost at the very beginning of working on a book is, what point of view am I going to tell this from? Is this a first person narrative? Is this a, and you make this very interesting choice for at least part of the book, which is it's told from the point of view of a group of residents, if you will, of the local cemetery. So not only is it being told by um, people who have died who used to live in this town, but it's also being told in the first person plural, which is a very it's not a viewpoint or a type of writing that we run into very often. Tell us about
Mhm.
why you chose that point of view for those sections of the book.
So for my first book, I had a very strong first person narrator.
Mhm.
And she kind of is the whole point you read that book because she's got this wonderful voice, and that was the reason people love that book is because of that narrator. So I had to separate myself from that narrator. So I knew that I had to write not in first person for a while. So I wrote the first drafts of this book in this omniscient third person.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I had read, a few people had told me, mostly my father's friends, that I wrote that my first book reminded them a little bit of John Irving. And I knew that was flattering, but I hadn't read any John Irving. And that felt sort of embarrassing, but I hadn't. So I read Gart first, and then I read Owen Meany, and then I read on and on. Like I think I read 6 or 7 of his books. Um, because and I thought, okay, I can see where they're coming from, that we have a similar sense of humor. But this is like, I would love to write something like this where that is grander, and that also where every little thing that happens ends up mattering in the end, and you kind of think it's all random, and then it comes to some big climactic thing, and so that I found very satisfying as a reader, and I wasn't seeing in a lot of contemporary fiction. And because I think you do need a lot of patience as a reader, although hopefully like you're entertained enough in my book and then John Irving's books to just kind of go with it. So that was something I set out to do, and he uses in some of his books this third person omniscient narrator.
Mhm.
Sometimes he has a first person, but so that's what I'd tried. And then I had a friend read some of it, and he said, well, I just have a question, that who's this narrator, this omniscient narrator has so much personality. Who's talking?
Yeah.
He keeps making jokes, or she or they or whatever keeps making jokes, and it has to be someone who's talking. It doesn't make sense. So I said, don't worry about it. Like, I don't care. Until I finished the draft. And then when I got to McDowell, in the first couple of days I was there, I was like, okay, probably time to address Lucas's complaint about this book. And when you get to McDowell, they kind of hammer home all of the people who have been there before you. So
Yeah.
they're like, you don't waste your time here, because geniuses walk these walls, and why did we pick you? So like they talk about James Baldwin, and then Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town There,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the cemetery is there that that is the sort of Our Town cemetery. I have always, well, not always, I have felt close to cemeteries because I lived in a cemetery when I was in Alabama. So when I started like the fifth graders book that I was writing in the very beginning, I was living in a groundskeeper's house in the cemetery. Um, so it made sense to me in some ways, but I also was scared and resistant to do it. Not because of the we narration so much, that didn't scare me that much, but um, I Lincoln and the Bardo had come out fairly recently, and I didn't want people to think I was sort of like a George Saunders copycat. So I tried it because it did make sense to me, because I'm trying to tie this like 2014. There's the opioid crisis going on, and there's this family who's dealing with the imminent death of their father, and then all this stuff that I want to work in about 1904 to 1925, this naturalist, like, and who is going to care about that but the dead people in the town, who both remember this person and still care about anyone who's lived before, and then deeply the people in the cemetery deeply love anyone who's living, because that's
Yeah.
like that's their entertainment, and sort of their children maybe. And so I tried it, showed it to some friends, and they said like, this is all you, this is not George Saunders. And after that, I just went, I didn't question it anymore. And it really helped me gel the book together in a way that made sense to me. And I don't think I could have written it any other way, in the way that I wanted to work in all the things that I ultimately didn't want to let go of.
Yeah, and as you say, the narrative voice really does have a sense of humor and a personality, and I love the plurality of it and the way you mention, the different names. And so you have people who were part of this group who died in the 18th century, and you had people who died 6 weeks ago, and it makes it a really interesting angle. You mentioned Thornton Wilder, and when I'm first reading the description of your fictional town, Everton, New Hampshire, in the opening pages, the description ends with a town no different from any other place, a place where people live and people die. And I am immediately the stage manager in our town. All I can think about is that opening monologue where he describes Grover's Corners. Here's the butternut tree, and here's the congregational church and everything. How did you? What specific aspects of small town life did you want to sort of bring to the surface in this novel?
Well, the good and the bad. But what I like most about small town life and writing about small towns is I like characters, everybody knows each other. And I love gossip. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm a very gossipy person and I'm a very gossipy writer. And I just love sort of this feeling and I love claustrophobia for characters. I love, that putting someone in a situation that they feel like they can't leave and that everyone is looking at them and they're sort of exposed, and in a place where, and I also really wanted to play with somebody who has to learn, and I think a lot of people learn this in their 20s, to appreciate where they're from and to appreciate their family. Yeah. After they've gone through this sort of I want to get as far away from here as possible. So, and I like small towns because I love small shops and small town centers, but then I'd like to have my own space. My ideal is that I can be in my backyard and nobody knows I'm there. So I live in a small town now, although we don't have a great town center. So there are more ideal small towns than the one I'm in right now. But the claustrophobia and the gossipy nature are the things that everybody knows everybody, and that you can't go to the supermarket without running into somebody interesting.
There are, we've talked a little bit about, the ghosts who are narrators, but there are definitely aspects of magical realism in this novel. And I wonder what drew you to that. I think some people still think of magical realism as kind of, well, that's a Latin American genre, Garcia Marquez and Esquivel. But why did you want to use that particular form in this novel?
Yeah, I guess I went on a journey with that when I started out as a writer, actually I did one of the first stories that really lit me on fire was reading George Saunders' Sea Oak, which is a magical story. And some Amy Bender, and that is more sort of straight magic. And I thought, if I could write stuff like that that's dark and weird, but also says something real about the world or society, but doesn't feel like it has to stick to realism. So I wrote in the beginning more I have a zombie story, and I have a mermaid story, and then I wrote some more realist stories, and I had some teachers in my MFA program that said this is where I think your writing shines more. And so I kind of had to figure out who I was as a writer, and one thing I kind of figured out was that what I like in the world is all these can you believe that really happened? Or do you believe this? You could have a conversation with someone that's I really do believe that people can heal with their hands and their healing energy. There are people that really believe in that. Or for my first book, it was all about sleepwalking, and that I just love these stories where people really go to McDonald's and don't remember that they ordered a Big Mac and fries, and stories like that. And then to pile them on top of each other so that it makes it feel really magical, even though each one by itself isn't that magical. And then I think that magic, there's maybe more. The healing hands, you can probably, you could argue one way or another, like how magic are they? Is it just something that the town believes? It's, the nurse says at the beginning when the baby's born, oh, this baby cured my sciatica, but we don't have any proof of that. There's no,
Yeah.
So much of her healing touch is about what people hope it does, and what people want it to do. And so I had that in the book early on. That was one of the first things I had. And then, but having that slight bit of magic then invites more of it, and it allows me to play with a lot of coincidence in my writing, because I'm like, okay, if you can believe this, I can get you to believe a lot.
Yeah.
And there's lots of coincidence that I think works in this novel that might not work in another novel. So I'm able to be a little sillier and set up these really domino situations where one thing causes a bunch of other stuff, that it just like that one thing needed to happen in order for everything to sort of go off the rails. And
Right.
there's really two scenes for me that I won't spoil, but
Yeah.
a scene in the middle and a scene at the end, where because you've bought into enough of the magic, that the coincidence really lets me have some real fun with the whole scene.
Yeah. So a lot of times I pick up a novel and I'll think, well, this person was influenced by, say George Saunders or Amor Towles or Charles Dickens or whoever. But within the first 20 pages of this novel, I went from like, I had Hugh Lofting, Thornton Wilder, Neil Gaiman, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Who do you see as your influences as you were working on this novel?
I feel like I read a lot. I was a bookseller
Mhm.
for a long time, and I had this really meaningful conversation to me, so I got a master's in English literature before I got an MFA, just because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I was like, and I was a philosophy major, and I thought I wanted to be a writer, but only during my last semester of college did I figure that out. So I felt like I had some more reading to do. So I was talking to his professor, and he taught there, and I was just talking to him one day, and he made a comment about Harry Potter. And I was just kind of, like, he was talking about Harry Potter as if it was great literature, and I said, "Oh, I'm just kind of surprised you like Harry Potter." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, people who really love books aren't snobby about them." And I just thought that was like, from someone who is that famous and is that known for, criticizing or like, reading books. That really meant a lot to me, as I was 22 at the time. So from that point on, I just kind of like, I'll read anything and I'll think about it and take it for what it is. And so I kind of have continued that way, that I don't try to stick to any one genre, or I just kind of read what people recommend to me. And I mean, I do consider this book my love letter to John Irving, because it is so influenced by him. But I think it's influenced by everything I read too, and also by a lot of things I watch on TV.
Yeah. Now, another technique you use in this novel, which I really like, I've tried to do this a lot of times in my own novels, and I think it's, first of all, for me as a writer, it's really fun to do, but I also enjoy it as a reader, is you use documentary storytelling. You create, or in some cases retrieve, documents. In this case, it's not just written documents. You use photographs, but we also have sort of magazine and newspaper articles. We have excerpts from works that are by one of your characters, who, as you said, is a real person. Tell us about how, first of all, why that technique, and then also a little bit about how you created these documents, because some of them I think you created from scratch, and others are more closely connected to actual real documents.
So they're all the historical, all of that is I mean, they're real, and then I messed with them.
Right, right, yes.
So they're all real. So the first one you see, so it's the book that's set in 2014, and then the first one you get this article that's sent as an email, and it's a article from 1904. It's from like the Atlantic Monthly, although I changed it to the New Hampshire Spectator, I think. And it's an article about this Dr. Dolittle character. And that article is, and then through the rest, it's all excerpts from Ernest Harold Baines, the Dr. Dolittle, his real books, and that is in his voice. So those, what I would do, they're all in public domain, and then a lot of his photographs are also in the book that are that his wife took, and those are also in public domain. So I was able to use those. And what I would do is, because so as I'm getting to know this person through his writing, I was in the library one day in Newport and talking to the librarian there, and said someone else in the room overheard me talking about Ernest Harold Baines, and this guy just sort of pipes up and goes, "Ernest Harold Baines, he was quite the womanizer." And that is that's what I love about small towns, is that someone like pipes up as though we're talking actually about someone who's still living, but they know even somebody who died in 1925 is like still kind of part of the town. Or at least that's how it is in my imagination. So he said that, and then I asked a couple other historians about it. And one of them told me to keep it positive. That's the joke that I make in the author's note. I mean, he was not, really, he is a good-natured person. He was just kind of like, "Oh, I like to keep it positive." And then someone else said, "Oh yes, he was always down at the Cornish Art Colony, where like with the women artists, while his wife is home taking care of the bear and the wolves," which I just love because I have a young child. So I took his writing. So I bought all his books off eBay. And then I was able to just, have them at my house, which is easier than going up to New Hampshire all the time, because I was in Rhode Island, now I'm in Mass. And so I took them, typed up all the best stories that I wanted to use, trying to limit myself to to the bear and the fox mostly. Although there's also a wolf story in there. Type those up, and then I just kind of hack at them and like take out because I was trying to make them as short as possible, because they're just supposed to be for texture. And then I wanted to work in like some jokes that he would never have made in his writing about being a bit of a womanizer, because it has to have more of a plot than just almost those stories that he's telling there. A lot of them were really, well, they were for anyone, but they could be read by children. They were not like, and people didn't write about their personal life in that way. So I definitely take liberties with them, but they're all the stories of what happens with the animals in those are true. I don't think I really changed anything there. Like, and some of the best lines are not mine; they're his.
Yeah, yeah. What a great resource. So we talked a little bit about magical realism in this novel, but there's some really stark realism in this novel too. And you alluded to this briefly before. Tell us about how you incorporate the devastating effects of the opioid crisis on small town America into this novel.
Yeah, so I'm researching this town, this real town, but also because of the type of writer I am, I don't feel like I have to tell the truth, because I'm, thinking about what kind of magic thing I'm going to add. And so I wasn't so worried about telling the truth, but as I'm spending time in the town, talking to people in the town, and then reading a lot of articles about the town, and sort of like finding out when you search this town in New England newspapers, what shows up. And this is pretty much that it's been a town that's been hit hard by the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
And so I am a writer that kind of puts it in and then thinks about it hard later. But so at first I kind of just had it in there as I had a missing person in the town, and why wasn't anyone looking for them, for the girl, the woman? And that was kind of an easy answer. And then it became part of the brother character, his story. And so then it became like, it got larger and larger. And just like the brother character kind of snuck up on me as to how important he would be to the story. So at first he was just kind of there for like sibling jabs, and then he became a real person with a real story. And so the whole thing kind of happened accidentally, and then I had to really think about it and do research and read books and watch documentaries. And I have friends who were able to read it and or read those parts of it especially, and give me some feedback to make sure. And I think that I'm so glad I did it, and didn't question it, because I think it does add like a lot of the emotional depth to the book is telling, especially I think Augie's story. Um, so it was not something I set out to do, something that happened sort of accidentally.
So as you said, this is a story about a young woman who comes back to her hometown at a, I think it's fair to say, a fairly low point in her life, um, partly to help care for her dying father. Tell us a little bit about that, about the family, and about specifically about the her parent Emma's parents and their relationship, um, and how that sort of, because I feel like that sort of forms the emotional core of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, so much with both the question about the opioid crisis and then talking about this family. So much of the book is about second chances,
Yeah.
and about sort of making sure, um, trying to get your family to come together before a keystone member of the family passes away. And so Emma, she's the main character, comes home. She's been born with this healing touch in her hands, and she's coming home because her father is suffering from a mysterious brain disease, and they think that he doesn't have that long to live. And so she's been born with this healing touch, and her father is sick, and she knows if whatever healing touch she ever had, it's not enough, was never enough to heal her father from dying of a brain disease. So she has to kind of deal with that as like the responsibility of being a healer but not being able to do anything. And she's been kind of just MIA from her family, who's been, that the whole family as a whole has been going through some bad stuff. With the brother has been in rehab twice, and then the Clive, the father, has had an affair with his colleague. And so the mother has just been kind of, Ingrid, the mother, has just been through a couple really hard years, and she's just fed up. And so the whole family is broken, and the brother resents the sister a lot. And then the father is sorry, but he's an eccentric guy, and he doesn't really know how to properly be sorry. And then at the same time, he's also hallucinating. So they're all kind of in a tough spot at the beginning, and then so much of the book is about them all getting second chances in different ways. Because what the ghosts in the graveyard want most, the narrators, is they want everyone who is living to have a second chance of some kind, because that's what they would like most. They want a second chance at life, to make something, not so much in the way that we want. I mean, maybe some of them do, like we think like ghosts have unfinished business, that's like a classic thing that we think ghost wants. But the ghosts in the graveyard just want a little bit more time where they can be alive, so they can enjoy their life, like, yeah, just even to do simple things. Like one of them really wants to eat a whole chocolate cake because she spent her whole life on a diet, and one of them just wants to like go for a run and feel his body again. So the ghosts really desperately want everyone to have second chances, and they want this family to have second chances in sort of all this different ways that they see healing could happen before Clive moves on to the graveyard.
Yeah, and Clive, yeah, you said he has this brain disease, but as I'm reading, I kept going back and forth between, like, is this a gift, or is this mental illness, or is this some combination of the two, or are we commenting on one by comparing it to the other? I mean, talk a little bit about what, he has these hallucinations, but they're not, from his point of view, they're mostly sort of positive experiences, right?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with I mean, he, I think, is a guy who has been blessed all his life.
Mm-hmm.
He has had a lot of things handed to him, and he has had a wife who has taken care of him for a long time, and he has been allowed to be this sort of eccentric guy. So he's been this poetry professor, this tenured poetry professor, and he's also in a Black Sabbath cover band, and he's sort of like the rock star in the town. Everyone thinks he's cool, and he has a big personality and a lot of friends. And at the beginning of the novel, has been forced into retirement, has lost some of the things that sort of made him who he is. So he is struggling with, what's my identity, what's my worth now if I'm losing all the things that made me kind of a cool guy. But the hallucinations definitely turn out to be not as horrible as they might be in a more realistic story.
Yeah.
It is a mysterious brain disease. It is not. I did not feel like I had to stick to a real dementia situation, but a lot of the things that I use do really happen to people, and I did. One of the people actually in Newport, who's the president of the Historical Society, works with patients who have some brain ailments, and she said, well, Lewy body patients often see animals.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard of that, and I hadn't really heard of Lewy body disease until Robin Williams died.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went down that rabbit hole, and that was one way that I was like, sort of this gift from the universe. It was like, okay, how do I tie in Ernest Harold Baines, the Dr. Dolittle? Okay, he's a ghost. Okay, and he's had real animals in his house, and now I've got this. And one of the main characters is suffering from brain disease, and he's got hallucinated animals in his house. And so it was just all those things that I didn't realize like how much was being gifted to me as I'm poking around doing research until I was like, oh, the light bulb goes off. Oh, that's how they're connected.
Yeah.
So that, but I also wanted to write a story, and this isn't about playing who's the hero. And the one thing that matters, the ghosts really want, what they care most about is that everyone gets more time alive, but especially children.
Yeah.
They have like a sort of spectrum of like, as we do, of unacceptable to acceptable deaths. And when a 91-year-old dies, they do not get that upset about it, just as we do in real life. And then they have the children in the town must be protected at all costs, and that's where they really get upset. So it's so I wanted to write a story that is a little bit inspired by Owen Meany, that has something at the end where everything works out okay for the characters you care about the most.
Yeah. So as you said, Emma's father was a poetry professor, and he makes this great comment about poetry, which I wondered if you could sort of just unpack for us a little bit, or maybe relate to your own writing. He says, a poet loves anything that better illuminates the daily horror of being alive. Can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I think that's both my sense of humor, and then I had a poetry professor who I feel like had this sense of humor, and there's one line in there that there's two lines in there that I stole from this poetry professor, David Huddle. He's a poet, and he says at the end of every restaurant meal, he always says, let's get out of this hellhole. And actually I gave that line to Ralph Kelsey, but I love that line. It can be very embarrassing if you're out to dinner and someone says, let's get out of this hellhole. And then there's one other line that I gave him that I used that I forget. But I think that what he's really saying is that life is beautiful, and that poetry and writing sort of makes you appreciate how beautiful life is, but in this sort of darkly comic way of saying, like, because it's so horrible, it's beautiful. And that's, I guess, what I love so much about writing, is that it makes me pay attention to the world in a closer way. And even when it's horrible, at least I'm paying attention.
Yeah. I think that the ghost narrators do a really good job of that, sort of creating that counterpoint that, like you said, making you appreciate these very simple things in life, eating a piece of cake, going for a run, just experiencing the physicality of your own body, because since they don't have that, I just found that really interesting. You would think, like dead people narrating sounds like kind of a downer, but really it's not.
Hmm.
It's very much the opposite to me. They explain how you should appreciate these little things in life. And one of them says something else about writing, or about telling a story, at least, which I would love for you to apply to your own writing. And they say that a good story doesn't always follow an arrow. Sometimes it meanders a little bit instead. Do you think that applies to your writing?
Yeah, I'm definitely winking at the reader there, but I'm like, I know there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and they're like, why did I get this story about this woman and the bears? But so I'm kind of like, okay, just hang in there. This will pay off for you, if you can just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride. Just trust me a little. Um, and so, yeah, that's a line where I'm really like being pretty self-aware.
Well, we like to end every episode of Inside the Writer Studio with the same 10 questions. You should be able to answer each of them in just a few words, but hopefully they'll give our listeners a little something to think about. So if you're ready, we will begin. What word do you love to work into your writing?
I love words that have big meanings, like big. So something even just I like on that first page. I just like there's rejoices, and I just like that. That's a strong word. So
Yeah.
something like that.
What word do you hate to encounter in other people's writing?
I would say nothing bothers me. That single words would never stop me.
Okay. Where's your favorite place to write?
In bed.
Where could you never write?
I tried in the car, and I ended up with sciatica.
To what rule of grammar do you pay least attention?
I pay zero attention to grammar at all.
Oh, good. What was the first book you remember reading?
Island of the Blue Dolphins, I read when I was in third grade, and my brother was assigned it in sixth grade, and I felt like the smartest, best reader in the world.
What are you reading now?
I just started Emily St. John Mandel's new book, The Sea of Tranquility, which I'm really enjoying.
Here in Winston-Salem in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to.
Oh, cool.
We had her on the show last year, but it was via Zoom, so now I finally get to say hi face to face.
Oh, cool.
What book would you like to have written?
Oh, Dragons Love Tacos, which is a children's book.
I love that book.
It's so good.
I have a young friend who likes to read that book.
That's so good.
What sort of book would you like to write, but probably never will?
Historical fiction. It was, I got a taste of doing some of it this time, and I don't think it's where my talents are, but it's so much fun to do that kind of research.
Yeah. And finally, what would you like to hear a reader tell you?
That they really loved it, that it made them laugh. I always want to know that it made them laugh.
Yeah. This has been Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and my guest today has been Annie Hartnett, author of the new novel Unlikely Animals, which is available wherever books are sold. Annie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Inside the Writer's Studio is sponsored by Bookmarks, a literary nonprofit that runs the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas and operates a community gathering place and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. To find out more about Bookmarks and all its programs, visit www.bookmarksnc.org. Inside the Writer's Studio is proud to be affiliated with Libro FM. Unlike other audiobook platforms, Libro FM supports your local independent bookstore. Whether you buy a single book or, like me, a monthly subscription, you can link your account to your local store or to Bookmarks to support literary community. For a special 2-for-1 offer, go to libro.fm and use the discount code WRITERS. If you've enjoyed Inside the Writer's Studio, please consider leaving a rating or review online at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Inside the Writer's Studio posts new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. In our next episode, I'll be talking to Kyle Lukoff about his middle grade novel, Different Kinds of Fruit. Until then, thanks for listening, and may you read with wonder and write with passion.